in the heart of Portland, Oregon, where the autumn rain creates a gentle symphony against the windows of the Multnomah County Children's Center, 10-year-old Marcus Thompson sat alone on his narrow bed, staring out at the gray October sky. The Douglas fir trees that lined the facility's grounds swayed in the persistent Oregon drizzle, their branches heavy with moisture that seemed to mirror the weight in Marcus's young heart. He had been in the system for 3 years now, bounced between foster homes like a pinball, each placement ending with the same crushing words, "It's just not working out." Marcus wasn't a bad kid. Social workers always made sure to mention that in their report. He was quiet, almost too quiet, with intelligent brown eyes that seemed to hold stories no 10-year-old should carry. But somewhere along the way, Marcus had learned that keeping people at a distance hurt less than letting them close only to watch them walk away. The other children at the center played loudly in the common room down the hall, their laughter echoing off the institutional walls, but Marcus preferred the solitude of his shared bedroom when his roommate wasn't there. Today was different, though. Mrs. Patterson, one of the newer social workers with kind eyes and an endless supply of patience, had mentioned something about a field trip to the Oregon Humane Society shelter downtown. Most of the kids had jumped at the chance to see puppies and kittens, but Marcus felt that familiar knot in his stomach. Animals, like people, probably wouldn't want anything to do with him either. Still, it beat sitting in group therapy listening to other kids talk about their feelings when his own felt too big and complicated to put into word. As the yellow school bus wound its way through Portland's Southeast Division, Marcus pressed his face against the rain-streaked window. The city moved past in blurs of coffee shops, vintage stores, and food carts, the kind of eclectic neighborhood life that made Portland unique. He wondered what it would be like to belong somewhere, to have a place where someone looked forward to seeing him come home. The Oregon Humane Society building sat on Southeast 8th Avenue, a modern facility with large windows and a welcoming entrance that somehow managed to feel both professional and homey. As their group of 12 children filed through the doors, they were greeted by the complex symphony of the shelter, dogs barking in various pitches, cats meowing, and the constant hum of activity as volunteers and staff moved through their daily routines of caring for animals that, like Marcus, were waiting for someone to choose them. Sarah, their enthusiastic volunteer guide, was probably in her 20s with the kind of bright energy that Marcus had learned to be wary of. Adults who were too cheerful usually had expectations he couldn't meet. She led them through the cat adoption area first, where orange tabbies and sleek black cats lounged in spacious condos, many of them pressing against the glass as potential visitors approached. Several of his groupmates squealed with delight, but Marcus hung back, observing rather than engaging. "Now we're going to visit our dog adoption area," Sarah announced as they walked down a long corridor. "We have some wonderful dogs waiting for their forever families. Some have been here longer than others, but every single one of them has so much love to give." The dog adoption area was a series of large, clean kennels with both indoor and outdoor access. Most dogs immediately pressed against the chain-link fronts of their enclosures, tails wagging frantically as potential adopters approached. There were golden retrievers with tennis balls, beagles with soulful eyes, pit bull mixes with wiggling bodies, and countless mutts of every size and color. The noise was overwhelming, a cacophony of barks and whines and the scraping of paws against concrete. But at the very end of the row, in the last kennel on the left, Marcus noticed something different. While every other dog was vying for attention, one large dog lay curled in the back corner of his enclosure, deliberately facing away from the walkway. He was big, probably 80 pounds, with a coat that might have once been golden but now looked dull and patchy. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the scars that crisscrossed the dog's face and shoulders, telling a story of a hard life that no animal should endure. While the other children clustered around the friendlier, more adoptable dogs, Marcus found himself drawn to this solitary figure. He approached the kennel quietly, reading the information card attached to the front. Rusty, approximately 7 years old, German Shepherd mix, arrived 6 months ago. The rest of the information was filled with cautionary language about his need for an experienced owner and special handling requirements. "That one's been a real challenge," Sarah said softly, having noticed Marcus's interest. "Rusty was found as part of a dog fighting operation that was shut down. He's made some progress with our behavioral team, but he's still pretty reactive to new people. We're hoping to find him a very special home with someone who understands traumatized animals." As if sensing he was being discussed, Rusty slowly turned his head toward them. One of his ears was partially torn, and a long scar ran from above his left eye down to his muzzle, but his eyes held an intelligence and depth that made Marcus's chest tight. They were amber-colored, like autumn leaves, and filled with a wariness that Marcus recognized immediately. It was the same look he saw in his own reflection every morning. "Has anyone wanted to adopt him?" Marcus asked quietly. Sarah's expression grew sad. "We've had a few inquiries over the months, but once people meet him and see how shut down he is, they usually change their minds. He doesn't show well, you know. He won't come to the front of the kennel, won't wag his tail, barely acknowledges people. Most families want a dog that's immediately friendly and engaging." Marcus understood completely. He was the human equivalent of Rusty, the kid who didn't show well, who kept people at a distance, who had learned that protecting yourself was more important than risking rejection. As the rest of his group moved on to see the shelter's other facilities, Marcus lingered by Rusty's kennel. "Hey there," he whispered, crouching down so he was at the dog's eye level. "I know exactly how you feel." For just a moment Rusty's ears twitched forward, and Marcus could have sworn he saw the faintest recognition in those amber eyes before the dog turned away again, but not before Marcus caught something that made his heart skip. Rusty hadn't moved away from the front of the kennel. In fact, he seemed to be listening. The visit ended too soon, with Mrs. Patterson gathering their group for the bus ride back to the center. As they walked toward the exit, Marcus turned back once more to look toward the dog adoption area, though he couldn't see Rusty's kennel from where they stood. Something had shifted in those few minutes by the chain-link barrier, something he couldn't quite name but felt deeply in his bones. That night, lying in his narrow bed while his roommate Tommy snored softly in the bed across the room, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about Rusty. He wondered what the dog's life had been like before the shelter, what had happened to create all those scars, and whether Rusty ever dreamed about having a family the way Marcus did. Most importantly, he wondered if anyone would ever see past the damage to the loyal heart that Marcus somehow sensed was still beating beneath all that protective armor. The Oregon rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows, and Marcus fell asleep to its familiar sound, dreaming for the first time in years not about being chosen, but about choosing someone else. Over the next several weeks, Marcus couldn't shake the image of Rusty from his mind. During school, while his classmates at Creston Elementary focused on long division and Oregon history, Marcus found himself sketching dogs in the margins of his notebook. During the evening study period at the center, he researched German shepherds and dog behavior on the ancient computer in the common room, learning about trauma responses in animals and reading stories about rescue dogs who had overcome difficult pasts. Mrs. Patterson noticed his newfound interest when she caught him reading library books about dog training and animal psychology. "You really connected with that dog at the shelter, didn't you?" she asked one afternoon as they sat in her small office, surrounded by case files and motivational posters about resilience and hope. Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak without revealing how much it mattered to him. "Would you like to visit him again?" Mrs. Patterson asked gently. "I could arrange for us to go back to the shelter. Sometimes animals do better with repeat visitors, people they get to know slowly." The possibility that he might see Rusty again filled Marcus with an excitement he hadn't felt in years, followed immediately by the crushing fear that the dog might not remember him or, worse, might no longer be there. But he managed a small nod, and Mrs. Patterson smiled as she made a note in her planner. The following Saturday, Marcus found himself back at the Oregon Humane Society, this time with just Mrs. Patterson rather than a large group. The autumn air was crisp and clean, with that particular Pacific Northwest clarity that comes after a good rain. Mount Hood was visible in the distance, its snow-capped peak rising above the city like a guardian watching over all of Portland's lost souls. Sarah remembered them and seemed genuinely pleased to see Marcus again. "I was hoping you might come back," she said as she led them through the familiar corridors. "Rusty has been different since your visit. It's hard to explain, but he's been more alert, more present. Our behavioral team has noticed it too." Marcus's heart pounded as they approached Rusty's kennel, afraid of what he might find. But there, in the same back corner, lay the big German Shepherd mix, and this time, when he heard footsteps, Rusty immediately lifted his head and looked directly at Marcus. For a moment that felt suspended in time, boy and dog simply looked at each other, and Marcus saw something in those amber eyes that took his breath away. Recognition. "Well, I'll be," Sarah murmured. "I've never seen him respond to anyone like that." This time, when Marcus crouched down by the kennel front, Rusty stood up slowly, his movements careful and deliberate, and walked to the chain-link barrier that separated them. The dog was even larger than Marcus had remembered, with powerful shoulders and legs that spoke of strength despite his scarred appearance. Up close, Marcus could see that Rusty's eyes held not just wariness, but a deep intelligence and something that looked remarkably like hope. "Hey, Rusty," Marcus said softly, extending his fingers through the chain link. "I came back to see you." Rusty's nose twitched as he cautiously sniffed Marcus's fingers, and then, in a moment that made Marcus's eyes fill with tears, the dog gently pressed his head against the boy's hand. The contact was brief, but it was the first time Rusty had voluntarily touched any human since arriving at the shelter. "That's incredible," Sarah breathed. "Marcus, I think you might be exactly what this dog has been waiting for." Over the next several weeks, Marcus became a regular visitor to the shelter. Every Saturday, Mrs. Patterson would drive him the few miles from the Children's Center to southeast Portland, and Marcus would spend 2 hours sitting by Rusty's kennel, reading aloud from library books, talking about his week at school, or simply sitting in comfortable silence. Gradually, Rusty began responding more and more, first by coming immediately to the front of his kennel when he heard Marcus's voice, then by pressing against the chain link whenever Marcus was there, and eventually by actually wagging his tail, just a small, tentative movement at first, but unmistakably joyful. Sarah began allowing Marcus to enter Rusty's kennel under close supervision, and their bond deepened rapidly. Rusty was gentle and careful with Marcus, as if he understood that this boy, like himself, had been hurt and needed patience. Marcus discovered that despite his reputation for aggression, Rusty was incredibly responsive to quiet commands and seemed to crave the kind of calm, consistent interaction that Marcus naturally provided. "I've been working with animals for 15 years, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the shelter's head behaviorist, told Mrs. Patterson after observing one of Marcus and Rusty's sessions. "What I'm seeing here is remarkable. This dog has found his person, and this boy has found his calling. They're healing each other." The problem, of course, was that Marcus was 10 years old, living in a group facility, with no ability to adopt a dog. But Mrs. Patterson was the kind of social worker who believed in fighting for her kids, and she began making phone calls and writing reports, documenting the unprecedented progress both Marcus and Rusty were making through their relationship. It was during Marcus's 8th visit to the shelter that everything changed. A family had come in looking for a large dog, and despite Sarah's careful explanation of Rusty's challenges, they insisted on meeting him. Marcus arrived for his regular Saturday visit to find Rusty agitated and withdrawn, pressed into the back corner of his kennel in a way he hadn't been for weeks. "What happened?" Marcus asked Sarah, his heart sinking at the sight of his friend's regression. "The Morrison family spent about 20 minutes with him yesterday," Sarah explained sadly. "They brought their 2 young children, and despite our warnings, they tried to rush the introduction. Rusty didn't hurt anyone, but he shut down completely when the kids got too excited and loud. They decided he wasn't what they were looking for. Marcus felt a familiar rage building in his chest, the same anger he felt every time another foster family decided he wasn't what they were looking for. But this time, it wasn't about him. It was about Rusty, who deserved so much better than being judged by people who couldn't see past his scars to his gentle heart. "That's not fair," Marcus said, his voice stronger than usual. They didn't even try to understand him. As Marcus approached Rusty's kennel, the dog looked up with eyes that seemed to hold all the disappointment and rejection in the world. But when he saw Marcus, something shifted, and Rusty slowly made his way to the front of the enclosure, pressing his entire body against the chain link as if seeking comfort from his young friend. "I know it hurts," Marcus whispered, slipping his fingers through the barrier to stroke Rusty's scarred head. "I know what it's like when people don't give you a real chance. But I'm not going anywhere, okay? I'll keep coming back as long as you need me to." It was in that moment, sitting on the concrete floor of an animal shelter with his hand pressed against the fence that separated him from a dog the world had given up on, that Marcus made a decision that would shape the rest of his life. Somehow, someway, he was going to make sure Rusty got the family he deserved. And if no one else could see what Marcus saw in this damaged but beautiful dog, then Marcus would just have to make them understand. Mrs. Patterson found him there an hour later, still talking quietly to Rusty, both of them seeming calmer and more peaceful than they had when she'd left them. As they drove back through Portland's tree-lined streets toward the Children's Center, Marcus finally spoke up from the passenger seat. "Mrs. Patterson, what would it take for someone like me to adopt Rusty?" She glanced at him in the rearview mirror, her expression both sad and admiring. "Oh, honey, I know how much you care about him, but the system just doesn't work that way. You're a minor in state care, living in a group facility. There's no provision for pet ownership in your situation." Marcus had expected that answer, but hearing it out loud still felt like a punch to the stomach. "What if I found a foster family who would take both of us?" Mrs. Patterson pulled into the parking lot of a Starbucks and turned to face him fully. "Marcus, I can see how much this dog means to you, and I've seen how much you mean to him. Let me do some research, make some calls. I can't make any promises, but there might be options we haven't explored yet." That night, Marcus lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of the Children's Center settling into sleep around him. Down the hall, someone was crying quietly. Another new kid, probably, trying to muffle their sobs in their pillow the way Marcus had done so many times in his first weeks here. But for the first time in his life, Marcus wasn't thinking about his own pain. All he could think about was Rusty, alone in that kennel, probably wondering if Marcus was just another person who would eventually stop coming around. Mrs. Patterson was true to her word. Over the next 2 weeks, she made dozens of phone calls, reaching out to specialized foster families, therapeutic programs, and even some unconventional placement options. What she found was a small but growing movement in child services toward therapeutic animal partnerships, especially for children who had experienced trauma and struggled with traditional placement options. "I found something," she told Marcus one afternoon as they sat in her office, her voice carefully controlled but unable to hide a note of excitement. "There's a family in southeast Portland, the Andersons, who specialize in therapeutic fostering. Jim Anderson is a retired teacher, and his wife Linda is a veterinarian. They've been working with the state for 5 years, taking in kids who need specialized care, and they've had great success with animal-assisted therapy." Marcus's heart started beating faster. Would they consider taking Rusty too? "That's the incredible part," Mrs. Patterson continued. "When I explained your situation and your bond with Rusty, Linda became very interested. She's familiar with the Oregon Humane Society and has actually been following Rusty's case. She thinks that a therapeutic placement with both you and Rusty could be beneficial for everyone involved." The next week felt like the longest of Marcus's life. The Andersons had to be interviewed and approved for the special circumstances of the placement, Rusty had to undergo additional behavioral evaluations, and there were countless forms and assessments and meetings. Marcus tried not to get his hopes up, but every night he fell asleep imagining what it would be like to have Rusty curled up on the floor next to his bed, to wake up every morning knowing his best friend was right there. Finally, on a crisp November morning when the Portland sky was the color of pewter and the maple trees in the center's courtyard had turned brilliant shades of orange and red, Mrs. Patterson knocked on Marcus's door with a smile that lit up her entire face. "Pack your things, kiddo," she said. "You and Rusty are going home." The Andersons lived in a cozy craftsman-style house on Southeast Hawthorne Boulevard, surrounded by the kind of eclectic neighborhood that made Portland famous. The house had a large, fenced backyard with mature oak trees and a vegetable garden that Linda tended with the same care she brought to healing animals. Jim had converted the basement into a workshop where he built furniture and dog agility equipment, and every room in the house seemed to have at least one cat curled up in a sunny spot. Linda Anderson was exactly what Marcus had imagined a veterinarian would look like. Calm, gentle, with capable hands and eyes that seemed to see straight into your soul. Jim was taller and more animated, with a teacher's instinct for making everyone feel welcome and important. But what struck Marcus most was how they looked at each other after 30 years of marriage, with the kind of easy affection that Marcus had only seen in movies. "We're so glad you're here, Marcus," Linda said as she showed him to his room, a real bedroom with his own bed, his own desk, and windows that looked out onto the backyard where Rusty would soon be running. "We've been looking forward to meeting you for weeks." The reunion with Rusty at the shelter was everything Marcus had dreamed it would be. When Sarah brought the big dog out on a leash to meet the Andersons in one of the shelter's meet and greet rooms, Rusty's entire demeanor changed the moment he saw Marcus. His tail began wagging so hard his entire back end wiggled, and he pulled toward the boy with an eagerness that made everyone in the room smile. "Well, there's no question about the bond between these two," Dr. Martinez observed as Rusty pressed against Marcus's legs while the boy scratched behind his ears. "This dog has found his family." Linda knelt down slowly, allowing Rusty to approach her at his own pace. Her veterinary training was evident in the way she moved, confident but non-threatening, patient but engaged. When Rusty cautiously sniffed her outstretched hand and then allowed her to pet his head, Linda's eyes filled with tears. "Look at those scars," she murmured, not with pity but with the professional assessment of someone who had seen too many abused animals. "You've been through hell, haven't you, big guy?" But those days are over now. The drive from the shelter to the Andersons' house was surreal for Marcus. Rusty rode in the back seat with him, his big head resting on Marcus's lap, occasionally lifting up to look out the window at his new city. As they drove through Portland's diverse neighborhoods, past coffee shops and food trucks, vintage stores and community gardens, Marcus felt something he'd almost forgotten existed: hope. The first few weeks at the Anderson house were an adjustment for everyone. Rusty, despite his bond with Marcus, was still wary of new environments and routines. He shadowed Marcus constantly, as if afraid that the boy might disappear if he let him out of his sight. At night, Rusty slept on a large dog bed next to Marcus's human bed, and more than once Marcus woke up to find the dog's watchful amber eyes checking to make sure he was still there. Linda's veterinary expertise proved invaluable in helping Rusty adjust. She identified several old injuries that had never been properly treated and began a gentle rehabilitation program that slowly restored some of Rusty's mobility and reduced his chronic pain. Under her care, Rusty's coat began to fill in and shine, and while his scars would always be visible, he began to carry himself with more confidence. Jim worked with Marcus on the academic gaps that had developed during his time bouncing between schools and placement. But more importantly, he helped Marcus learn to trust that this placement was different, that the Andersons weren't going to change their minds and send him away when things got difficult. "Every family has rough days," Jim told him one afternoon as they worked on algebra homework at the kitchen table while Rusty napped at their feet. "The difference between a real family and a temporary placement is that real families work through the rough days together instead of giving up." As winter settled over Portland, bringing its characteristic gray drizzle and shorter days, Marcus and Rusty settled into routines that began to feel like home. Marcus walked Rusty to school every morning, leaving him with Linda at her veterinary clinic, where Rusty had become something of a mascot among the staff. After school, Marcus would pick up Rusty and they'd walk home together through the neighborhood, Rusty's tail wagging as he recognized familiar sights and smells. The transformation in both boy and dog was remarkable. Marcus, who had spent years keeping people at arm's length, began opening up to the Andersons, sharing stories about his past and dreams about his future. His grades improved dramatically, and he even joined the middle school track team, with Rusty serving as his enthusiastic training partner on long runs through Portland's Riverside Park. Rusty, meanwhile, blossomed under the consistent love and routine. His reactive behavior disappeared almost entirely, replaced by the gentle, intelligent temperament that Marcus had always known was hiding beneath the trauma. He learned to trust Linda and Jim, greeting them with tail wags when they came home and even allowing other visitors to pet him when Marcus was nearby to provide reassurance. By spring, it was clear to everyone that this wasn't a temporary placement anymore. It was a family. The Andersons began the paperwork to adopt Marcus permanently, and on a sunny May afternoon when the cherry trees along southeast Portland streets were heavy with pink blossoms, Marcus officially became Marcus Anderson, with Rusty as his forever companion. The years that followed were the happiest of Marcus's young life. He thrived in high school, excelling in both academics and athletics, with Rusty as his constant supporter at track meets and cross-country races. Linda and Jim attended every event, cheering from the sidelines like the proud parents Marcus had always dreamed of having. During the summers, the family took camping trips to the Oregon coast and the Cascade Mountains, with Rusty proving to be an excellent hiking companion who seemed to revel in the freedom of running through forests and splashing in mountain streams. As Marcus grew from a boy into a young man, his bond with Rusty only deepened. The dog who had once been rejected by everyone became Marcus's confidant, study buddy, and best friend. When Marcus struggled with the typical challenges of adolescence, Rusty seemed to sense his moods and would rest his large head on Marcus's lap, providing comfort without judgment. When Marcus celebrated achievements like making the varsity track team or getting accepted to Portland State University, Rusty was always there, tail wagging, as if he understood exactly why everyone was so happy. By the time Marcus graduated from high school, Rusty was 11 years old, showing some gray around his muzzle but still energetic and devoted. Marcus had been accepted to Portland State University with a partial scholarship to study social work, inspired by his own experiences in the system and his desire to help other kids like himself. The plan was for him to live at home and commute to campus, unwilling to be separated from Rusty or the family that had given him everything he'd never known he needed. College brought new challenges and opportunities. Marcus threw himself into his studies, particularly drawn to courses on trauma-informed care and animal-assisted therapy. His professors were impressed by his insights into the foster care system and his passion for making a difference. He began volunteering at the same Oregon Humane Society where he'd met Rusty, helping with difficult-to-place animals and sharing his story with potential adopters who were hesitant about taking on pets with behavioral challenges. It was during his junior year at Portland State that Marcus met Sarah Chun in their advanced child development class. Sarah was studying to become a school counselor, drawn to the field by her own experiences as the daughter of immigrants who had struggled to navigate unfamiliar systems. She was smart, compassionate, and had an infectious laugh that made Marcus feel lighter than he'd felt in years. Their first date was a walk through Laurelhurst Park with Rusty, who was now 12 and moving a bit slower but still insisted on accompanying Marcus everywhere. Sarah later told him that she knew she was falling for him when she saw how gently he helped Rusty into the car afterward, and how Rusty looked at Marcus with such complete trust and adoration. "That dog loves you more than anything in the world," she said as they sat on the Andersons' front porch that evening, watching Rusty doze in the last rays of sunlight. "And the way you take care of him tells me everything I need to know about the kind of person you are." Rusty, for his part, seemed to approve of Sarah immediately. He allowed her to pet him on their first meeting, and by their third date, he was bringing her his favorite tennis ball as a sign of acceptance. Linda and Jim were charmed by Sarah's quick wit and genuine interest in their family's story, and it wasn't long before she was joining them for Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. Marcus proposed to Sarah on a crisp October morning at Mount Tabor Park, with 13-year-old Rusty lying patiently nearby as Marcus got down on one knee. The ring was simple but beautiful, and Sarah said yes through happy tears before turning to include Rusty in their embrace. The engagement photos they took that day included all three of them, and they remain some of Marcus's most treasured possessions. They married the following spring in the Andersons' backyard, surrounded by family and friends under a canopy of cherry blossoms. Rusty wore a bow tie for the occasion and served as the unofficial ring bearer, though he was more interested in greeting guests than maintaining any kind of formal dignity. Linda and Jim walked Marcus down the aisle together, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house when Marcus included a mention of Rusty in his vows, thanking his four-legged best friend for teaching him about unconditional love. Marcus and Sarah moved into a small house just a few miles from the Andersons, with a fenced yard where Rusty could spend his golden years in comfort. Marcus had graduated with his Bachelor of Social Work and was working for the same county agency that had once been responsible for his care, specializing in finding therapeutic placements for hard-to-place children. Sarah had completed her master's in school counseling and was working at a middle school in East Portland, helping kids navigate some of the same challenges Marcus had faced. Rusty, now 14, was showing his age but remained devoted to his family. He moved more slowly and slept more deeply, but his eyes still lit up when Marcus came home from work, and he still insisted on being involved in everything that happened in their household. When Sarah became pregnant during their second year of marriage, Rusty seemed to sense the change in her even before they did, becoming more protective and gentle around her. The pregnancy was smooth and happy, with Marcus and Sarah spending evenings planning for their future child while Rusty dozed contentedly nearby. They prepared a nursery in the small second bedroom of their house, and Marcus often found himself talking to Rusty about what it would be like to have a baby in the family. "You're going to be the best big brother," he would tell the aging dog while scratching behind his ears. "You've had so much practice taking care of me all these years." Emma Anderson was born on a snowy February morning, arriving 3 weeks early but healthy and perfect. When Marcus and Sarah brought her home from the hospital, Rusty's reaction was everything they had hoped for and more. The old dog, who had been listless and anxious during Sarah's absence, immediately perked up when he heard the baby's cries. He approached slowly and carefully, sniffing gently at the tiny bundle in Sarah's arms, and then looked up at Marcus with an expression that seemed to say, "This is ours to protect." From that moment on, Rusty appointed himself Emma's guardian. He positioned himself wherever the baby was, whether she was sleeping in her crib, lying on a blanket during tummy time, or being held by her parent. He was incredibly gentle, seeming to understand that this tiny person required extra care. When Emma cried, Rusty would find Marcus or Sarah and alert them with soft whines and meaningful looks toward the nursery. As Emma grew from a newborn into an active infant, Rusty adapted his protective instincts to match her development. When she began crawling, he would position himself as a living barrier between her and potential hazards like the stairs or the fireplace. When she started pulling herself up on furniture, Rusty would place himself strategically to cushion any potential falls. Marcus and Sarah marveled at the old dog's patience and intuition, watching him allow Emma to grab his ears and pull his tail without so much as a flinch. By Emma's first birthday, she and Rusty had developed their own special relationship. Emma's first word after Mama and Dada was woo-woo, her attempt at Rusty, and she would crawl across the room to snuggle against the patient dog's side. Rusty, despite his advanced age and occasional stiffness, would gently lick her face and tolerate her toddler enthusiasm with the grace of a saint. It was around this time that Marcus began to notice more significant changes in Rusty's health. The dog who had once been so strong and energetic was sleeping more and moving with obvious discomfort. Linda, now not just their adoptive mother but also Rusty's veterinarian, confirmed what Marcus feared. At 15, Rusty was in the final stage of his life, with arthritis and organ function declining in ways that were typical for a dog his age and size. "He's not in pain," Linda assured Marcus during one of their regular checkups, "but he's definitely slowing down. The most important thing now is keeping him comfortable and making sure he knows how loved he is." Marcus struggled with the knowledge that his best friend's time was limited. Rusty had been such a constant presence in his life for over 5 years that the thought of losing him was almost unbearable. But he was determined to make Rusty's remaining time as happy and peaceful as possible, adjusting their routines to accommodate the old dog's limitations while still maintaining the dignity and purpose that had always been so important to him. It was on a warm September afternoon, when Emma was 14 months old and just beginning to walk steadily, that everything changed. Sarah had taken Emma to the small playground just 2 blocks from their house, one of their regular outings that gave Marcus some time to work on case files from home while Rusty napped in the afternoon sun streaming through their living room windows. Marcus was deep in concentration, reviewing placement options for a particularly challenging case, when Rusty suddenly lifted his head and let out a sharp bark that Marcus hadn't heard in years. It was the alert bark from Rusty's younger days, urgent and demanding attention. The old dog struggled to his feet with more speed than he'd shown in months, continuing to bark while looking directly at Marcus with an intensity that made every hair on the back of Marcus's neck stand up. "What is it, boy? What's wrong?" Marcus asked, immediately closing his laptop and giving Rusty his full attention. Rusty moved toward the front door, his arthritic gait made awkward by his urgency. He barked again, then looked back at Marcus with an expression that clearly communicated, "Follow me." Now. Without hesitation, Marcus grabbed his keys and followed Rusty out the front door. The old dog, moving with a determination that seemed to draw from some deep reserve of strength, headed directly toward the playground where Sarah and Emma had gone. Marcus's heart began to race as he matched Rusty's pace, the dog's continued low barking serving as a constant reminder that something was very wrong. As they approached the small neighborhood park, Marcus could see the playground equipment but no sign of Sarah and Emma. The swing set stood empty, moving slightly in the afternoon breeze, and the small slide that Emma loved to climb was deserted. But Rusty didn't slow down, continuing past the playground toward the small retention pond that sat at the edge of the park property. It was then that Marcus heard it, Sarah's voice, high and desperate, calling Emma's name. His blood turned to ice as he rounded the corner and saw the scene that would be burned into his memory forever. Sarah was kneeling by the edge of the retention pond, which had filled with the recent September rains, her phone in one hand as she spoke frantically to emergency dispatchers while scanning the murky water. "She was right here," Sarah was saying, her voice breaking with panic. "I turned away for just a second to throw away her snack wrapper, and when I looked back, she was gone. I think she might have fallen in. I can't see her anywhere." Without a moment's hesitation, Rusty plunged into the pond. The old dog, who had struggled to walk across their living room just minutes before, moved through the water with purpose and strength that seemed impossible for his age and condition. Marcus kicked off his shoes and followed, the cold September water soaking through his clothes as he waded in after his dog. The retention pond was deeper than it looked, nearly 4 feet at its center, and the murky water made it impossible to see more than a few inches below the surface. Marcus felt around desperately with his hands while Sarah continued to call Emma's name from the shore. But it was Rusty who found her, diving completely underwater near a fallen log at the pond's far edge and emerging with Emma's small form grasped gently but firmly in his jaws. The toddler was unconscious and blue around the lips, water streaming from her mouth and nose as Rusty carried her toward shore. Marcus took his daughter from the dog's mouth and immediately began the infant CPR techniques he'd learned years ago as part of his social work training, tilting Emma's head back and giving gentle rescue breaths while Sarah supported her small body. "Come on, Emma," Marcus pleaded as he worked. "Come on, baby girl. Breathe for Daddy." After what felt like an eternity but was probably less than 30 seconds, Emma suddenly coughed up pond water and began crying, the most beautiful sound Marcus had ever heard. Color returned to her face as she wailed, and her eyes opened, unfocused but alert. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air as the paramedics arrived, but Emma was already breathing normally, more frightened than injured. As the EMTs checked Emma's vital signs and prepared to transport her to the hospital for observation, Marcus looked around for Rusty and felt his heart stop. The old dog was lying on the muddy shore of the pond, his sides heaving with the effort of breathing. The superhuman strength that had allowed him to save Emma seemed to have drained from his body all at once, leaving him looking smaller and more fragile than Marcus had ever seen him. "Rusty!" Marcus called, kneeling beside his friend while Sarah held a now alert Emma. "Linda!" he called to his adoptive mother, who had arrived with the emergency responders. "Something's wrong with Rusty." Linda immediately began examining the exhausted dog, her veterinary training taking over even as her heart broke at the sight of her old friend's condition. "His heart is racing and his breathing is labored," she said quietly to Marcus. "I think the exertion of the rescue was too much for his system. We need to get him to the clinic immediately." The next few hours passed in a blur of emergency rooms and veterinary clinic. Emma was examined thoroughly at Dornbecher Children's Hospital and released with a clean bill of health, suffering no lasting effects from her brief submersion. But Rusty's condition was more serious. The effort of diving into the pond and swimming while carrying Emma had triggered heart failure in the 15-year-old dog, and despite Linda's best efforts, his body was shutting down. That evening, as Marcus sat in the veterinary clinic with Rusty's head in his lap, the old dog's breathing was shallow but peaceful. Emma, tired from her adventure but completely healthy, was sleeping in Sarah's arms in the chair nearby. Linda had explained gently that Rusty's heart was simply too tired to continue, that the rescue had taken everything he had left to give. "He saved her life," Linda said softly, tears streaming down her face as she watched her son comfort his dying best friend. "Without Rusty's alert and his ability to find her in that murky water, we might have lost Emma. He gave everything he had to save his little girl." As if he had been waiting for Marcus to understand, Rusty lifted his head slightly and looked into his best friend's eyes one last time. In that amber gaze, Marcus saw everything their relationship had been. The frightened, scarred dog in the shelter who had learned to trust again, the loyal companion who had helped a lonely boy become a confident man, the gentle guardian who had watched over a growing family, and finally, the heroic protector who had given his own life to save the next generation. "Thank you, boy," Marcus whispered, his tears falling onto Rusty's graying fur. "Thank you for everything. Thank you for saving us all." With Sarah's hand on his shoulder and Emma sleeping peacefully nearby, Marcus held Rusty as the old dog took his final breath. Even in death, there was a peacefulness to Rusty's expression, as if he knew that his life's work was complete, that the circle of love and loyalty that had begun in an animal shelter 15 years ago had reached its perfect conclusion. The days that followed were both heartbreaking and healing. The story of Rusty's heroic rescue spread throughout their Portland community, touching the hearts of everyone who heard it. The Oregon Humane Society held a memorial service for their former resident, celebrating not just his final act of heroism but his incredible journey from a rejected, scarred dog to a beloved family member who had saved a child's life. Marcus struggled with grief unlike anything he'd experienced, even during his difficult childhood. Losing Rusty felt like losing a part of himself, the part that had learned to love unconditionally and trust completely. But as the weeks passed, he began to find comfort in the incredible gift Rusty had given them. Emma was alive and healthy, growing more beautiful and spirited every day, because an old dog had found the strength to save her when she needed him most. Sarah, who had initially blamed herself for Emma's accident, found healing in recognizing that Rusty's alert had been the miracle that brought Marcus to the pond in time to help. "He knew," she said one evening as they sat in their living room, Emma playing with toys on the floor where Rusty used to lie. "Somehow, he knew Emma was in trouble, and he made sure you knew too. He saved both of us that day." As Emma grew from a toddler into a young child, Marcus and Sarah made sure she understood the story of the dog who had saved her life. They showed her pictures of Rusty and told her stories about his gentle nature, his loyalty, and his incredible courage. Emma listened with the serious attention that young children bring to important stories, and she seemed to understand that Rusty was someone very special who had loved her very much. When Emma was 4 years old, she asked if they could visit Rusty's grave in the pet cemetery where he was buried under a headstone that read, "Rusty Anderson, beloved friend, faithful guardian, hero." They made it a tradition to visit on Emma's birthday and on the anniversary of the rescue, bringing fresh flowers and sharing stories about the dog who had given everything to keep their family safe. Marcus returned to his work with renewed purpose, specializing even more specifically in therapeutic placements and animal-assisted interventions. He spoke at conferences about his own experience and Rusty's story, advocating for programs that recognized the healing power of the human-animal bond. The Marcus and Rusty Foundation, which he and Sarah established in honor of their dog, provided grants to help place therapy animals with at-risk youth and supported research into animal-assisted interventions for trauma survivors. Years passed, and Emma grew into a confident, compassionate child who inherited her father's empathy and her mother's determination. She excelled in school and showed a natural affinity for animals, often asking her parents when they could get another dog. Marcus and Sarah weren't ready yet. Rusty's absence was still too profound, but they knew that someday, when the time was right, they would open their hearts and their home to another dog who needed a second chance. On Emma's 10th birthday, the same age Marcus had been when he first met Rusty, she made a special request. Instead of a party with friends, she wanted to volunteer at the Oregon Humane Society, working with animals who were waiting for their forever families. As they walked through the same kennels where Marcus had first encountered Rusty 15 years earlier, Emma stopped in front of a kennel housing a large, scarred dog who had been at the shelter for several months. "What's his story?" Emma asked Sarah, the volunteer coordinator who was leading their group. "That's Bruno," Sarah explained. "He's about 3 years old, a German Shepherd mix like Rusty was. He came from a difficult situation, and he's had trouble trusting people. He's been here for almost 8 months now." Emma looked at the dog, who was lying in the back of his kennel, deliberately facing away from the visitors, and something in her young face reminded Marcus powerfully of himself at that age. "He's scared," she said softly. "He doesn't trust people because they've hurt him before." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat as he watched his daughter's reaction to Bruno. The dog's story was heartbreakingly similar to Rusty's, and Emma's instinctive understanding of his fear was eerily reminiscent of Marcus's own response all those years ago. "Can I sit with him for a while?" Emma asked. With Sarah's supervision, Emma spent the next hour sitting quietly outside Bruno's kennel, reading aloud from a book she'd brought and occasionally talking softly to the dog. Gradually, Bruno began to show interest, first lifting his head to listen, then slowly approaching the front of the kennel, and finally pressing against the chain link as Emma gently extended her fingers through the barrier. As Marcus watched his daughter connect with Bruno in exactly the same way he had once connected with Rusty, he felt the last pieces of his grief transform into something else: gratitude, hope, and the absolute certainty that love, once given freely, never really ends. It multiplies, spreads, and creates new connections across time and space, forming an unbreakable chain of compassion that links one generation to the next. 6 months later, Bruno became the newest member of the Anderson family. Like Rusty before him, he bloomed under Emma's patient love and the family's consistent care. He never replaced Rusty. No dog could, but he brought his own unique joy and personality to their home, along with the profound satisfaction of giving another rejected animal the second chance he deserved. Emma grew up with Bruno as her constant companion, just as Marcus had grown up with Rusty. The stories of Rusty's heroism became part of the family's oral history, passed down with the understanding that love and loyalty are not just emotions but actions, choices that we make every day to put someone else's needs before our own. As Marcus approached his 40th birthday, now a successful social worker and father of 3, Emma had been joined by twin brothers, Michael and David. He often reflected on the incredible journey that had begun with a lonely boy and a rejected dog in a Portland animal shelter. The path had been marked by moments of heartbreak and triumph, loss and redemption, but through it all, the lesson had remained constant. Sometimes the most profound love comes from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones that nobody else believes in. The Marcus and Rusty Foundation had grown beyond anything he and Sarah had originally envisioned, funding programs across the Pacific Northwest and beyond. They had helped place hundreds of therapy animals with at-risk children, supported research that validated the healing power of human-animal bonds, and created a network of therapeutic foster families who specialized in caring for both children and animals who had experienced trauma. Every year, on the anniversary of Rusty's death, the family held a celebration of his life and his legacy. Friends, colleagues, and members of the community would gather in their backyard to share stories, raise funds for the foundation, and honor the memory of a dog who had proven that love, once freely given, creates ripples that extend far beyond what we can imagine. Emma, now a teenager with plans to become a veterinarian like her grandmother Linda, often served as the keynote speaker at these gatherings. Her favorite story to tell was about the day she met Bruno, and how she had felt Rusty's presence guiding her to another dog who needed a second chance. "My dad always says that Rusty taught him about unconditional love," Emma would tell the assembled crowd, Bruno lying faithfully at her feet as she spoke. "But I think it was more than that. Rusty taught our whole family that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice. It's choosing to see the good in someone that everyone else has given up on. It's choosing to keep showing up, even when things get difficult. And it's choosing to sacrifice for the people you love, even when the cost is everything you have to give." As the sun set over Portland on those anniversary evenings, casting golden light through the oak trees in their backyard, Marcus would look around at the faces of the people who had gathered to honor Rusty's memory, Linda and Jim, now in their 70s but still actively involved in therapeutic fostering, Sarah, more beautiful and compassionate with each passing year, Emma and the twins, growing up with the unshakable knowledge that they are deeply loved, Bruno, alert and protective but gentle, and dozens of friends and colleagues who had been touched by their story. In those moments, Marcus could feel Rusty's presence as clearly as if the old dog were lying at his feet, amber eyes watchful and content. The circle of love that had begun in an animal shelter with a frightened boy and a rejected dog had grown to encompass more people and animals than Marcus could count, creating a legacy that would continue long after he was gone. Sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet and his family was sleeping safely, Marcus would step out into their backyard and look up at the Portland sky, thinking about the journey that had brought him here. From a lonely child in the foster system to a man surrounded by love, from a boy who had never belonged anywhere to a father whose children would never doubt their place in the world, from someone who had been rejected by so many families to someone who now helped create families for others who needed them. And at the center of it all was the memory of a scarred, rejected dog who had taught him the most important lesson of his life. That love, real love, doesn't look for reasons or conditions or guarantees. It simply chooses to see the best in someone and then commits to helping them become everything they were meant to be. That kind of love changes everything it touches, creating chains of healing and hope that stretch across years and generations, connecting one heart to another in an endless web of compassion that makes the world a little bit brighter for everyone it reaches. In saving Rusty, Marcus had saved himself. In trusting Marcus, Rusty had learned to love again. And in saving Emma, Rusty had completed a circle of love and sacrifice that would inspire others to open their hearts to the forgotten, the rejected, and the unwanted, because sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones that nobody else believes in, and sometimes the most profound love stories are the ones that begin with someone deciding to give a second chance to a soul that everyone else has given up on.